not your fault. I spent those years learning how to build walls within walls. Closing myself in perceived safety. Now I see clearly how safe doesn't always mean free. The things that mean most are the hardest to see, and I meant to stay blind, and I tried to believe I was nothing. Must be answered with something that's true, and the truth was that I had more to do. I thought it was the end of the road. I thought it was the end of the road. I thought it was the end of the road, but it goes on and on and on. until you look right inside you. Whoa, now the only way out is way down, way down.
Greetings, everyone. Present here and anyone in the future. Thanks for stopping by. So, we're at a hostage exchange, or possibly a hostage exchange. We've had the request made. Just to catch everyone up here. So what we have is a boy with no memory, doesn't even remember how he got on a train, rescued by the young girl of this family who all has strange abilities, paranormal abilities, being able to make things explode, being able to find things, random projections of the future, being able to read minds, see in the dark, things like that. This family lives, it's the grandparents and the children of parents that are away in another country right now. And this boy is always willing to believe the worst possible thing about himself. This becomes a rather large factor when the police come to with a warrant saying that he's murdered 7 people, and he believes this instantly. The family is fighting this, and eventually we find out that none of the parts of the story hold up, and it's this character known as Big Doc who is trying to imprison Jan, is trying to study Jan. Possibly likely that's where Jan broke out from before. And one of the discoveries is that Jan actually has 2 abilities. I feel like there's maybe some hints of like another like psychic ability as well, but maybe very minor. But Jan can make people freeze in place, and he can also teleport to a place that, at least for what we know now, a place that he's been and can envision himself in, and then he teleports there. They have since kidnapped Ginny Rhodes, and the young girl that helped him initially, and are issuing not a ransom, but they're requesting basically an exchange. Bunch of elaborate directions of go to this phone booth, leave here, don't call anyone, don't bring anyone, those type of things. And Jan is definitely ready to rush headlong into it. 1 second here, sorry about that. He's definitely ready to rush headlong into doing whatever he can. He also doesn't believe this will actually help. He's concerned that they'll just keep them both because this isn't just about him, that Big Doc might be aware of the entire family's abilities. And let's see, what else? The gruff law enforcer is the local sheriff type person is begrudgingly on their side now after realizing that a lot of the paperwork had been faked that he was presented with. And that's pretty much where we're at. The call has come in, and they're deciding what they've been given instructions, and they're deciding what to do. Oh, and an ex-FBI person has just arrived. One of the best, who still consults, is how they described him. Chapter 8. Exchange. The small, slender, gray-haired man that Sergeant Bricker brought into the library and hurriedly introduced was quiet of voice, steely-eyed, and had a mouth so thin it seemed only a bloodless slit across the lower part of his face. He carried a black bag, and his manner was that of a person who had all the time in the world. But his narrow eyes darted quickly from face to face, then swept the room and fastened instantly on the recorder. Sorry, one side note here. I hadn't talked about why I was doing this, which is this is a book that I vaguely remember reading as a kid, that I remember getting attached to, and then completely forgetting about for many years. And there's been a lot of interesting bits coming up in it, like the idea that the difference between crazy and eccentric was how much money and position you had. That there's an importance in helping random people just for the good of it. That if money can't help people, what's the point of it? That you can just tell the kindness of a person. Things like that. The willingness to trust, the importance of consent. Yeah, really clueless, he says sarcastically, about why I was attached to this book in any way whatsoever. Okay, so he's just locked his eyes on the tape recorder that was recorded the phone conversation. Jackson Lane said, "Thank heaven you're here, Martin. We just had a call from one of the kidnappers. They're holding Ginny and demanding we turn Jan over to them in exchange. It has to be done immediately." "But those devils will keep them both," Heron Rhodes bit out. "I'm sure of it." "So this is a hostage deal," Nat Martin said in his low voice. "Let me hear the recording." Bill Zorn played it for him. The State Bureau man listened carefully, his eyes closed. When it was over, he stood a moment in thought, then looked at Heron. "This doesn't give us much time, Doctor. Can you tell me why Jan is so valuable to them?" "They want him because he's got an extremely rare ability that would make him immensely valuable in espionage to a foreign power." Nat Martin's only reaction was to close his eyes slowly, then open them. "I see. Has your granddaughter also a rare ability that would make her valuable in the same way?" Heron's jaws nodded. "She has. And I pray everyone present will treat this as a top-secret admission and forget you ever heard it. Nat Martin nodded. Then there's no question that they will keep her. And from the tone of the recording, I'd say she won't be kept in this country long. Surely not long enough to trace her by the usual methods. So there's only one thing to do. Martin came over and touched Jan on the shoulder. Bricker's told me a little about you, he said in an almost gentle voice. I realize you've had it rough. Are you game for this? Of course I'm game, Jan said impatiently, and glanced nervously at the clock. But we have to hurry. Right. Martin calmly zipped open his bag and with quick fingers took from it a thin disc and a roll of adhesive tape. Lift your shirt, he ordered. I'm going to tape this little transmitter to the small of your back. It hasn't much range, but it gives a signal I can follow if I can manage to stay within a quarter mile of you. When they pick you up, it'll probably be in a car this time. I want you to remove it without being seen and stuff it behind the seat. Now one more thing. Deftly he taped the tiny transmitter in place, then took another small object from his bag. This is a voice transmitter, he went on. It's small enough to fit into the pocket of your jeans without being noticed. It's switched on now and ready for action. After you enter the phone booth and get your instructions, I want you to call me and let me know what they tell you to do. Someone may be watching, so put the thing on the shelf and pretend you're still talking on the phone after your caller hangs up. It's a two-way job, so if there's a question you have to ask, you must press this button to hear my reply. Don't take it with you when you leave the booth. Just leave it there and I'll pick it up later. The state agent paused, and Hecuba said, Jan, it's chilly outside, so you better wear this jacket. It'll help hide that thing under your shirt. He slipped gratefully into the cotton jacket that went with his jeans and put the transmitter in a side pocket. We better go, he said with a glance at the clock. Two more things, said Martin, not to be hurried. First, I'll need someone to ride with me and help with the direction finder so I can keep track of Jan. Not you, Bricker. You're still in uniform. I'll go, said Bill Zorn. I know how to handle the thing. Good. Doctor, Doctor, have you a phone in your car? Yes. Want my number? Right. And I'll give you mine. We may have to keep in touch. They exchanged numbers, and Martin said, I'll follow you at a safe distance and park within sight of the theater. Let's move. Jan started for the hall, but hesitated as he saw Hecuba was looking at him, eyes moist. Suddenly she stepped forward and gave him a quick hug, holding him close. Bless you, she whispered. I'll be praying for you. Wordless, he clung gratefully to her a moment, then swallowed and hurried after Heron. Fear did not come until the speeding Rolls left the country road that went past the farm and shot into Glendale Highway. Then fear crept numbing through him as if a deadly drug had been forced into his veins. So many things could go wrong, and it would take only one of them to put him back in the hands of that unknown creature they called Big Doc. The doctor, as if sensing his dread, said firmly, We're going to lick those rascals, son. No matter what happens, keep that thought in mind. We're going to catch them and get you and Ginny back. It may only be a matter of hours, or it may take a day or so. Martin will need help. He's probably phoning for it now. It'll take a little time to locate you and set things up. So think tough, son, and don't let anything throw you. Jan mumbled he wouldn't. Heron said, I can't shake the feeling that Big Doc's path crossed mine somewhere. If I just had his name or a description of him. I know what he looks like, he managed to say. Don't tell me you're beginning to remember him. No, sir, but I keep dreaming of a man I'm sure is Big Doc. It has to be, because it's always the same man, and I wake up scared. Describe him, son. He's big. Not exactly tall, but real big and sort of flabby. And he's got a short, dark beard, kind of pointed, that covers the lower part of his face. His voice is soft. When he gets mad, he doesn't raise it like most people do. It just gets softer. Sure, I'd know him if I saw him. Does he speak with an accent? I don't know. Maybe? Could he be French or English? Oh, no, sir. I'd say German or something like that. Well, now we're getting somewhere. Heron drove for a few seconds in silence. I've met the rascal, I'm almost certain of it. But where in Dingateld's tarnation could it have been? Do you go to medical conventions? Only to those that deal with certain aspects of the mind. Now, let me think. I was in New York. I was in New York at one a few months back, and I went to another in London early last fall. Don't remember running across anyone like Big Doc at either of them. Then there was Geneva one more than a year ago. That could have been the place. Come to think of it, there was a Viennese specialist. Heron broke off abruptly, slowed the car, swinging suddenly onto a broad, brightly lit parking area that flanked the highway in a great curve. I almost forgot where we're going, he muttered. Suffering Caesar, I didn't expect to find it so crowded at this hour. What's this place? Jan asked, staring curiously at the ordered rows of parked cars and the continuous line of modern buildings beyond them. Strung overhead were thousands of bright pennants that flickered gaily in the lights, where lively music poured from hidden speakers. Midway Plaza, said Heron. Didn't you ever see a shopping mall before? I don't think so. Then you couldn't have been raised in America. All at once, the doctor muttered an exclamation and said, Yonder's a theater straight ahead, and we're 4 minutes late. The Rolls shot forward slowly and turned at the corner by the theater, then stopped. Jan fumbled at the door and managed to open it. He could see the phone booths to the right of the small crowd at the theater entrance, filing in for the late show. And at the same time he was aware that the phone in the booth was ringing. He felt the doctor's hand gripped on his shoulder as Heron, voice tight, whispered, God be with you, son. Jan swallowed, stepped out, and ran to the phone booth. There was a cold knot in his stomach as he lifted the receiver from the hook. Yes, he said unsteadily. I'm here. You're late, someone said accusingly in his ear. It's the same person who had given orders over the speaker in the library. I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? As he spoke, he drew the transmitter from his jacket pocket and placed it on the shelf beside the dog-eared phone book. The voice in his ear said, Go to the main entrance of the mall and walk through the rear parking area. You'll see a taxicab parked by the light directly opposite the rear entrance. The driver will take you to your first destination. Now repeat what I've told you so there will be no mistake. Jan lifted the transmitter from the shelf, held it nearer the phone, and replied, I'm to walk through the mall to the rear entrance and take a cab that will be waiting for me by the light. The driver will take me to my first destination. You have it, said the voice. Now move. When the speaker hung up, Jan stood a moment in indecision, trying to think. Suddenly, still holding the phone receiver as if he was using it, he pressed the button on the transmitter and asked, Did you hear that? Hadn't I better take the transmitter with me in the cab? Better not, came Nat Martin's voice, small and not too clear. I don't want you caught with it. We'll be tailing you. Good luck." Jan hung up the receiver, slipped the transmitter under the phone book, and hurried down the walk outside. Just hearing Nat Martin, knowing he was near and watching, helped restore his courage. The Rolls was nowhere in sight. He found the main entrance and began walking through, wondering why so many people were shopping at such a late hour. Then he saw the signs and realized this must be a special bargain night with prizes and free offerings that had attracted people from all around. How wonderful, he thought, to be safe and free and have family and friends and be able to wander about a place like this with money to spend for little things you wanted, to have no worry about the next hour or the next day. Then he thought of Ginny, locked away somewhere, alone and sick from the drug she had been given. He clenched his hands and hurried through the rear entrance. The cab was waiting where he had been told it would be. As he reached it, the thin-faced driver eyed him sharply and said in a low voice, "Your name's Riggs?" Jan nodded and got inside. "You know where to go?" Driver grunted, started the motor, and they shot away with a jerk. "Where are you taking me?" he asked the driver. "Ardmore," the man admitted. "Corner of 5th and Cherry. That's where the old man said he'd meet you." Oh. Ardmore. He had no idea how far it was, for he'd never heard of the place. All at once he wished he'd disobeyed Martin and brought the transmitter with him. Something could go wrong so easily, and for the first time he had a nagging feeling it would. What if Martin had tire trouble, or got caught in a traffic jam and lost him? Jan dug his fists into the pockets of his jacket and stared morosely at the late traffic and the lights of cheap business districts flashing by. As the minute passed, his courage slowly ebbed and was replaced by the fear that haunted him earlier. Once, leaning back in the seat, he felt the pressure of the small transmitter taped under his shirt. He felt it carefully, wondering if later, when the right moment came after changing cars, he would be able to remove it quickly and hide it. He decided they could manage it if they didn't give him the needle, as the heavy-faced George had tried to do before they took him away in the van. But why would they bother with that tonight? After all, he was going with them voluntarily this time. Then, with a feeling of mild astonishment, he remembered he had the ability to stop the needle if need be. He hoped the need wouldn't arise, for it suddenly came to him that it might be well to keep that particular ability hidden. After what may have been a half hour or more, the cab left the highway and entered what seemed to be one of the older suburbs. Something about it, perhaps the rundown buildings and the general ugliness, added to his dread. They crossed the railroad tracks, swung down past empty store buildings and a warehouse, and stopped on a corner beside the rusted tin structure that might have once been a machine shop. Fifth and Cherry," said the driver. Jan peered around in dismay. In the gloom of the streetlights, the other three corners seemed to only be empty lots filled with debris. You sure this is the right place?" he faltered. "I ought to know, bud. I was raised in this town. Funny place to meet a guy. There ain't nothing to be afraid of." Jan got out. The driver made a fast U-turn and drove hurriedly back the way he came. Hardly was the cab out of sight when a door in the side of the tin building creaked partially open. "Hey, you!" someone called in a low voice. "This way, on the double!" Sudden anger helped dampen his fear, and he took time about approaching the door. On the threshold he hesitated, trying to see into the darkness. Then a strong hand grasped his arm and drew him inside. Instantly he felt an awareness of danger, but before he could react to it, a wasp seemed to stick him. But before he could react to it, A wasp seemed to stick him in the back. He cried and tried to jerk away, only it was too late now for anything. His body turned to lead, and he fell into blackness. Let's go ahead and take a short break after that. I want to see if resting between chapters is going to be a little bit better. I feel like I should be able to, I used to be able to read longer than this, but maybe not push it too far coming back after all this. All right, so see you in a few minutes.
Your worship, honey, got me too far off the ground. When I jump from this pedestal, Lord knows it's a long way down. Need someone who wants to see me in the day and in the dark. Take shots with my demons, photograph my battle scars. Can you call me by my name? Can you step into this flame? Can you taste the fire on my lips? Baby, can you burn with them? Can you taste the fire on my lips? Baby, can you burn with them? Burn with it. Sometimes you get so shaky, makes your hands real hard to hold. I can feel your spirit aching, and your warm heart seems so cold. I can love you when you're angry, when your skin's too hot to touch. Be the mirror and the blade, yeah. Be the scepter and the crutch. When it's more than you can take, when the dam's about to
remember to unpause it this time after the break. Welcome back. Yeah, I use music as a timer for that to keep me honest on, like, oh, yeah, I've taken enough of a break. And it's like, oh, 30 seconds later. It's like, you can at least step away for the length of a song. Even if I'm just standing here waiting to get back to it. So continuing on. Chapter 9. Prisoner. He was awakened by degrees, painfully struggling to come out of a blackness that threatened to swallow him, yet trying desperately not to make the least movement. Every time he moved, the world heaved sickening about him. It was like being deathly ill in a tiny boat on a stormy sea. What had happened to him? Where was he? He opened his eyes and closed them quickly against the pain of the light. For a time beyond imagining, he tried to think and remember. Then very slowly, memory came back to him. Midway Plaza. The phone call. The long taxi ride to the tin building. The voice ordering him to the door. Jan groaned and opened his eyes again. The light hurt, but he squinted against it and struggled to sit up and take in his surroundings. Resting on an elbow, he waited until uneasy walls... Well, let's try that again. Resting on an elbow, he waited until the uneasy walls around him steadied, and then carefully turned his head. He was in a tiny room, just large enough to contain his cot, a chair, and a table. To the right was a door with a small circle of glass in the upper half of it. On the left was another door, partially open, disclosing a wash bowl and a toilet. There was no window in the place. The light came from a half globe in the ceiling. Suddenly dizzy, he sank down again, wondering how long he had been here. Without a clock or a window, it was impossible to tell whether it was day or night. Then, judging by Ginny's reaction, it came to him that it couldn't have taken more than 4 hours for the drug they'd given him to wear off, and more likely only 3. If it was 11:30 when he entered the tin shed, then it was still dark outside, and somewhere between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. All at once an awful thought struck him. He sat up again, clawing under his shirt to locate the tiny little transmitter that had been taped to the small of his back. It was not there. He was still sitting up, frightened now, when he heard a key turn in the lock of the door. Then slowly the door opened, and a big man in a rumpled white jacket entered and stood looking at him reproachfully. There was not the least doubt in his mind that his visitor was Big Doc. There was the great flabby body, the big round bald head, the short pointed beard, and the curious feeling of familiarity that had distinguished the dreamed version of the man. Even the plump white hands with their oddly pointed fingers were familiar. Shame on you, the big man purred softly, giving a slow shake of his head. Running away like that? Tisk. Have you no gratitude for what I have done for you? For a moment Jan could only stare at his visitor, hating him. Then he said hoarsely, "What have you ever done for me?" "You don't remember?" The broad face broke into a smile. "I didn't think you would. Matilda is very efficient. But you do remember this." A plump hand slipped into a side pocket of the white jacket and came out holding a small object partially covered with adhesive tape. It was the missing transmitter. The thing looked as if it had been smashed by a hammer. "You should be punished for trying to lead people here," the soft voice went on. But fortunately your little tattletale was discovered before any harm was done, so I will not blame you. After all, you did fall into evil hands. Once more there was the slow shake of the head, followed by the clicking of the tongue. That idiot Rhodes would undo all the work I have done with you. Jan clutched the side of his cot. Interesting point here. Immediately referring to the cot. I caught this in the previous chapter. Wow, we're out of space on the local recording. As I was saying, the not a cot, not the cot, his cot. I forget how to type anything. At the very least, suggesting, like, it's not just the suggesting the familiarity. It's that a subconscious instant surrender to the surroundings. Like a, oh, yes, this is where I've always belonged kind of thing. This is my home and I should get used to it. I don't know if that's intentional, but just kind of a little bit of a vibe of already giving up here. Jan clutched to the side of his cot, trying to steady himself against the room that wanted to revolve around him. Suddenly he wished he had the ability of Heron Rhodes to use the eye as a weapon. Then he was thankful he didn't, for in his hate he might have turned it on the man before him, with terrible consequences. "Where's Ginny?" he demanded. "She is quite safe, dear boy." You promised to turn her loose if I came back." "We did nothing of the kind. We promised merely to inform Mr. Rhodes where she could be found. Though I'm sure my associate had no intention of being specific. The name of a foreign country would have been enough." The big man shrugged and smiled. "He disobeyed our orders, so it does not matter. What really matters is you. You are a very important young personage, and we need Ginny for insurance you will not run away again. Not only would you be a grave danger to society, but Ginny would suffer." Boy, I've totally lost the voice I was trying to do for him earlier. Sorry about that. "She will always suffer painfully unless you do exactly as you are told. Do I make myself clear?" Jan half rose from the cot, fist unclenched, then fell back and clung to it again as the room tipped drunkenly. Nothing was clear at that moment, except he and Ginny had lost their chance of escape, and now were at the mercy of what surely must be a madman. You're crazy," he gasped. The big man smiled tolerantly. "No, dear boy, I am merely being practical. You have a rare and valuable ability, but you are also the victim of a difficult mental illness. Among other things, you have lost your identity. I have been trying hard to restore you, but it will take a long time. Unfortunately, it is complicated by—" "No!" Jan cried. You're lying. I know you're lying. You're trying to make out that I'm Bryce Riggs, but I'm not. I never—" "You are Bryce Riggs, dear boy." "I can't be. They say Bryce Riggs killed 7 people. I've never killed anyone." The big man shook his head sadly. "You should be thankful, my friend, that you have no memory of what you did. God is merciful that way. You have multiple personalities, and you killed under the influence of a most violent one. It has often been dominant. You were put away in a most unpleasant institution for the criminally insane. Again came a sad shake of the head. A truly frightful place. I would hate to see you sent back there, your mind blanked again. The big man paused. The little cold eyes and their plump rolls of flesh gave him a meaningful look. I had great trouble having you released to me, if I had not been who I am, with a name to be reckoned with in these matters. Who are you? Jan asked. I am your friend, dear boy, the best friend you ever had. I am trying to save you from yourself. Never forget that. Never forget that you are Bryce Riggs, not some other personality who would like to destroy Bryce Riggs and take over his mind. If I see any signs of such a personality emerging, I will be forced to turn you over to Matilda for further treatment. The big man smiled, then with a contemptuous flip of his hand he tossed the wrecked transmitter upon the table and went back through the door, closing and locking it. A moment later, the overhead light went out, leaving Jan in the darkness. Jan clung to his cot, fighting a new fear as well as the effects of the drug. The very sound of the name Matilda sent a chill of pure terror through him. Why? What was there in a name to make it so dreadful? With the lights turned off, the room was completely dark save for a bit of glass in the corridor door, which was now a small, vague circle of gray suspended in blackness. The dark added to his dread. As he thought of the comfort and security of the Rhodes Library, he was almost tempted to make use of his curious ability to go back there, if only for a little while. If he managed to do it from the van, he ought to be able to do it from this place, wherever it was. Or could he? He was so weak and upset from the drug they'd given him, it might be impossible. Then he realized it'd be wiser to save that move for later, after he located Ginny and worked out some sort of plan. Who or what was Matilda? A woman? Perhaps a person who had spoken over the loudspeaker in the library? Somehow he didn't think so. Big Doc had given him the feeling that Matilda was a thing. At that moment, remembering what Big Doc had said, an utterly horrible thought struck him. Was Matilda a machine that was used to blank a person's mind? Jan began to tremble. In a sudden reaction to the thought, he tottered from the cot, fell against the wall on his left, and felt his way to the open door of the toilet. It was only by accident that his groping, unsteady hand touched a wall switch, and a weak light came on in the ceiling. When he returned to the cot long minutes later, he left the little light on. Its soft glow dispelled some of the terror of being alone with his fears in utter darkness. Though he felt better now, an inner wisdom urged him to turn off his thoughts for a while and try to sleep. He must have succeeded after a fashion, for when he got up again and went to the toilet, he was able to walk steadily, and his head was clear. There was no drinking glass at the washbowl, but he held his mouth to the tap until he had his fill, then splashed cold water on his face. This time, when he returned to the cot, he was wide awake and the circuits of his mind were going at full speed. Matilda. It had to be a machine. It almost certainly had to be a machine they strapped you inside, with something like electrodes around it so they could run a current through your head. A special sort of current that would blank out what you were and leave you ready for something new. Sure, he could almost see the devilish thing. It was as clear in his mind if he'd actually been inside it. Then, with a little shock, he realized he had been inside of it because it was all so familiar to him. He'd been inside it maybe several times, and it had robbed him of his past. But he must have rebelled at the last session and gotten away before they turned him into Bryce Riggs. Anyway, there wasn't the least doubt what was in store for Ginny. They'd blank out the roads part of her and leave her a poor little blind girl with no one to turn to but Big Doc or one of his helpers. Then she'd have to do just what she was told. And they'd do the same thing to himself. And they'd do the same thing to himself until Jan, who'd already lost his past, became Bryce Riggs, without even a memory of the Rhodes family. He and Ginny were slated to become Big Doc's slaves. Of course it would take time, many months probably, and while it was going on, Ginny would be a sort of hostage to keep him from teleporting to freedom. Unless Big Doc decided to keep them drugged till they'd been taken safely out of the country. The thought of being drugged again brought Jan to his feet, hands clenched in rising uneasiness. Almost certainly plans had been made for a quick trip somewhere. These people, if they had any sense, wouldn't risk remaining here any longer than they had to after taking someone like Ginny. If he had any hope of saving her, he better start working on it immediately. He went quickly to the door and tested it, even though he knew it was locked. The latch did seem a little wobbly. Maybe if he had a screwdriver... His hand shot to the rear pocket where he had been carrying the knife. But the knife was gone, and now he discovered that all of his pockets had been emptied. Somehow he had to get out of here. How else could he locate Ginny? Suddenly it occurred to him that it might be worth trying to return to the Rhodes Library in the hopes of finding Nat Martin there. If he could see Martin, he could probably get a skeleton key or tools to open the door. Then he caught his breath at an idea so simple he wondered why he hadn't thought of it earlier. He could get another transmitter from Martin and bring it here. But what if the State Bureau man wasn't there at this hour? Jan rubbed his eyes, trying to think. If he could just locate Ginny, she could call to Otis and find out about Martin. In fact, she could set the whole thing up so that Martin would be ready for him when he arrived, and no time would be wasted. He sure didn't want to be late to get back here and caught with the new transmitter. He turned and studied the room. He didn't know what he was looking for, just something, anything that might help him get out of here so he could explore the building. Then, glancing into the lavatory, he saw the square of molding on the wall opposite the doorway. It looked as if a small window had been covered over. He sped to it, hope rising. Hurried inspection showed it to be a 2-foot square molding enclosed in what seemed to be a plywood panel, painted the same color as the walls. It was hardly noticeable at a distance. Only now, studying it closely, was he able to see that the upper part was hinged. With fingers that were suddenly trembling, he began clawing at the bottom of the panel, which was just above the level of his eyes. In his haste, he managed only to rip off the end of a fingernail. The panel was stuck fast. He whirled, searching frantically for some small thin object he could use as a pry. There was only the smashed transmitter on the table where Big Doc had tossed it. Three quick steps took him to it. His hand was just closing over it when a small, dull metallic sound made him freeze. Someone had unlocked the door. He stared at the door, and his eyes widened as he saw the knob begin to turn, slowly and stealthily. Chapter 10. adventure. Jan stood motionless, watching, holding his breath as the door moved slightly. It moved a little more, a fraction of an inch more, making no sound. Who could be on the other side of the door at this hour, using such care not to attract attention? Surely not Big Doc. Suddenly, for the first time, he thought of the unknown guard he escaped from days ago. The unremembered guard whose money and knife he'd taken, and whom he must have attacked and knocked unconscious. How he had managed it he had no idea, but there rose in his mind the vague features of a heavy-jawed man who might be the one he fought with. They were not pleasant features, and now it came to him that such a person could be unforgiving and vengeful. He flattened against the wall, determined to dart into the corridor and run for it if his visitor turned out to be the guard. From his position, he could not see the circle of glass in the upper part of the door, so he watched the widening crack as the door very slowly opened. Then he gasped as a small pale head appeared in the place he was watching. The eyes were hidden behind a large and very familiar pair of curving dark glasses. "Ginny! What? How? Oh, thank goodness!" Her small hands were icy as she clutched them, but he could feel her determination rising above her fear. "Oh, just told me you'd be here," she whispered hurriedly. "I was locked in a room down the hall. I got it out by using a trick. I'll tell you about it later. Come, we've got to get away from this awful place now." She tugged him into the hall. "Lock your door and take your key with you." Very carefully he closed the door and locked it, and slipped the key into his pocket. She led the way, her hands clinging to his. The narrow hall, dim only with a tiny light near the floor, was carpeted like his room, and their feet made little sound as they tiptoed to some steps leading down. The stairway surprised Jan, for he had assumed that they were in the wing of a one-story building. Ginny came to a halt at the head of the stairs and whispered, "You better go first. I have no depth perception, and they left my cane behind." He remembered she mentioned something about depth perception on the train, and thought he was still vague about what it meant. Firmly holding her hand, he started carefully downward to an even greater surprise. The stairs ended in a small recess in the corner of a great spacious hallway that he realized was the second floor of an old mansion. Paneled in dark wood, it was vaguely lighted by an oriental lamp on a table between two ornate chairs. Facing it, a broad stairway spiraled down to what must have been the main floor. Jan hesitated, studying the hall while he listened. He wondered how much time they had till daylight, and was rewarded by Ginny whispering, "I heard a clock somewhere below us strike 3 just before I found your room." He hadn't heard the clock with his door closed. In fact, in a closed place without windows, he hadn't heard much of anything but the soft flow of air from a ceiling vent. If it was only a little after 3, he couldn't have been unconscious quite as long as he thought. The house was quiet save for a faint snore coming from the other side of the nearest door on their right. There probably was a back stairway of somewhere, and he wondered whether it was to risk hunting for it or to go straight down and out the front way. The thought of the front entrance made him uneasy, but he decided on it anyway. It would be the quickest route to the street and safety, if there was a street. The thick carpeting of the hall deadened their footsteps. The great stairway, however, presented an unexpected problem. It squeaked. It made no difference how carefully and cautiously they proceeded downward. The heavy padded steps squeaked anyway. Then, within a few feet of the broad foyer, lighted by a single wall sconce, a telephone rang in the open reception room diagonally across from them. From where they crouched, Jan could see just past the high arched doorway into the room's interior. Someone must have been sitting by the phone, waiting for the call, for it was answered immediately. The voice was the same one that had phoned instructions to Heron Rose 4.5 hours ago and later given him orders at Midway Plaza. Only now the voice spoke a foreign language that sounded like German. The person was still talking when a door opened suddenly on the right of the stairway, and the bulky, white-jacketed figure of Big Doc strode with a sort of deliberate slowness across the foyer to the arched opening. Jan's heart leaped violently at this unexpected turn, and he could feel Ginny's fingers digging sharply into his arm. Big Doc had only to turn his head and glance in their direction, and they could hardly escape being seen. Yet to attempt flight back up the squeaky stairs would surely attract immediate attention. The speaker finished talking over the phone. Big Doc grunted and said, Well, Helga. Sorry, stuttering in an accent. That's new for me. Well, Helga? We are ready to leave, came the voice of Helga. We must pack immediately. But that is stupid, my dear. I warned you about calling them. I knew they would panic. It is not panic, Leopold. It is common sense. The boy alone was no worry until he escaped. No one knew about him. But the girl is a complication. Remember, we had not planned to take her till later. She was to be flown directly to Kiev by way of Havana. But now we have the two together. We must not endanger the project by remaining here an hour longer than necessary. Oh, nonsense, the doctor protests, shaking his head. I see little cause for alarm. We know the boy was unable to give the Rhodes bunch any information. Matilda took care of that. For how can they trace the girl? This is the perfect place for my work, and your people are completely upsetting it. They have no conception of the preparatory procedures and the time. Leopold! Yes, my dear? The tall, mannish figure of Helga. Boy, they're hitting all the classic 1979 stereotypes here, aren't they? The evil, the evil fat doctor, the manly German woman. Of course, Cuba's connected somehow. I mean, it's funny because these things stand out now, but like this was every story. This was like classic Cold War, Eastern Bloc kind of like. Anyway, The tall, mannish figure of Helga strode out of the room's shadow and confronted the doctor in the doorway. She was a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair, wearing a tailored pantsuit. Leopold, she repeated coldly, I am in charge of this side of the Atlantic. Let us have no arguments. I will inform the staff that they must pack immediately, and as soon as you are ready, the patients must be sedated for travel. Then. But what of Matilda? How? That depends. Clausen has already been alerted that he is to have the helicopter ready, and the fueling stops arranged for it. I will call him now and order him to bring it immediately. We will take Matilda if there is room on board. If not, possibly Jenna can have it shipped to us later. Anyway, your first model is still in Kiev. Big Doc threw up his hands and turned away, muttering to himself. Jan gripped the step where he had crouched and concentrated on Big Doc, praying that the man would not look up or turn his head. Miraculously, the doctor, still muttering to himself, passed within 6 feet of them without becoming aware of their presence. The stern-faced woman remained standing in the doorway a moment, frowning, then turned quickly and disappeared into the reception room. I feel like I've had those moments. I don't know. Maybe this is common, but those whole just feeling like you've controlled a random encounter like that. I think it's mostly the fear talking and the fear or excitement or. I know there's times it's, like, say you're playing a card game or poker or something like that. Did you convince somebody to bet because you're bluffing well? You're playing the table well? Or did you just will them to do it? And how distinctly is that line? And how fair is that? Jan rose and caught Ginny's hand. "Let's go," he whispered. "The front door." His foot had hardly touched the thick carpet of the foyer when he was jolted by the abrupt ringing of alarm in the hall upstairs. For an instant he froze, uncertain, but all at once realized they only had seconds to escape and raced to the door, dragging Ginny with him. The alarm was still ringing when his trembling hand began fumbling with the unfamiliar lock. Ginny thrust him aside, and in the next breath had the huge door unlocked and was tugging it open. Even as they slipped through and drew it shut, Jan was all too aware that they had passed the open room in full view of the stern Helga, and he expected momentarily to hear shouts and signs of pursuit. Yet as he raced across the large old-fashioned porch and down to a driveway, he heard nothing but the muttered ringing of the alarm. For a brief moment it seemed to have stopped. In its place there came a vague sound of a voice that seemed to be making an announcement over a loudspeaker. It flashed through Jan's mind that the alarm had been rung to awaken the staff, and that Helga was now giving orders for the evacuation. She must have been too engrossed in her task to notice an escape was taking place under her nose. He could hardly believe his luck. In a minute or two they would be on the street or a road somewhere and could start looking for help or a telephone. Glancing back, he saw lights snapping on in the house, and though the place was nearly hidden by foliage lining the kerning... Glancing back, he saw lights snapping on in the house, though the place was nearly hidden by the foliage lining the curving drive. Ahead the drive was lost in blackness, and Ginny was forced to lead the way. She had only gone a few yards when she stopped abruptly before the almost indiscernible outlines of what seemed to be a great wrought iron gate. After tugging at the latch, she whispered despairingly, "Oh, Jan, it's locked." The blackness of the night, the locked gate, the absence of street lights or any sound of traffic sent his hopes tumbling. No stars shone through the canopy of leaves overhead, and the low rumble of thunder warned him of approaching trouble. With the discovery of weeds underfoot, he realized the entrance had not been used in a long time. He tugged at the gate and muttered, "We ought to be able to climb it." "It's too tall," she said. "There's an arch above it. We can't get through." Feeling his way, he found a stone wall, stood on his toes reaching upward, and asked, "How much higher is it?" "Maybe about a foot, but there are wires running along the top. Barbed wires. I don't think we'd better try and climb it." "We've got to climb it," he said, wondering how she could possibly see in the dark. "If I can get on top, I can put my jacket over the wires and pull you up and then drop you on the other side." He leapt upward, caught the edge of the wall, damp with dew, and easily drew himself to the top. But when his bare hand touched one of the wires, he was given a powerful shock that sent him flying backwards. His head struck something, and he fell into nothingness. There was a roaring in his ears when he regained consciousness. His head hurt, and his mind was full of confused pictures of Big Doc and Matilda. He then became aware of a frightened Ginny fussing over him, rubbing his hands and shaking him. "Oh, Jan, say something. Are you all right?" He struggled up on an elbow and rubbed his head slowly. It still hurt, and there was a roaring in it, and the roaring was still in his ears, but Big Doc was fading. I'm all right," he muttered. "At least nothing seems to be broken. That's a live wire up there." "Those awful people," she whispered angrily. "How long was I out?" "Not long. Maybe a minute. Do you feel like walking now?" He didn't, but wobbled to his feet anyway. "You'll have to lead me. I can't see a thing. We've got to find the other entrance. It must be at the back of the house." "I'll follow the fence," she told him. "There's a corner just ahead." "How in the world can you tell?" It's sort of like radar," she murmured as she drew him carefully along the wall. "I mean, I can see exactly what's there, the outlines and all, but it's hard to make out how far away it is, and I never know about holes and things. That's why I miss my cane." She stopped and whispered, "We're at the corner. The wall ends, but a high steel fence goes to the top, past the house. We can't climb it. It sticks out at the top, with the barbed wire on it." Caution led them to silence as they crept nearer the house. When they approached it, the light from an upper window gleamed through the trees and edged a section of the barbed wire topping the fence. Seeing it, he knew it would be impossible to help Ginny over, even if it wasn't electrified, and he wondered how he'd managed to get over it himself the first time he escaped. Or had he gotten out by some other means? In a sudden, astonishing flash of memory, it came to him that he hadn't climbed the fence at all. He'd wished himself over on the other side, just as he had wished himself out of the van and back in the Rhodes Library after his capture. He picked a distant spot on a hill he'd glimpsed from some upper window in the house, and early in the morning of the day he'd woken up at the Glendale station, he'd smacked Bronsky, the guard, his guard, with the base of a table lamp, and wished himself to the hill. It had been an awful day, and he'd been so afraid he wouldn't reach the Glendale station in time. In time for what? The urgent tugging of Ginny's hand drew him back to the present. Then he'd heard it, somewhere in the distance, the distinctive chopping sound of an approaching helicopter. They began hurrying along the fence, trying to make their way quietly through the shrubbery and tangled vines and weeds, yet knowing that the time left to them to make good their escape was rapidly running out. Just as they reached a second gate, a high steel one like the fence, they were startled by a sudden blaze of lights that disclosed a broad space of lawn behind the house. It also lit up the rear driveway and the corner of the gate where the two of them were standing. Jan's first reaction was to give Ginny's hand a jerk and drop down beside her in the tangled ivy at the edge of the fence. For an unpleasant moment he thought their absence had been discovered and that the lights meant the beginning of a search. Then he realized they had been turned on to guide the helicopter landing. He looked hopefully at the gate and made out a short length of chain securing it to the fence. If it wasn't locked... "It's locked," Ginny whispered, instantly picking up on his thoughts. "I found the lock and it's closed tight. Do you suppose we could dig our way under the wires somewhere?" "We'll just have to," he whispered back and twisted around in the ivy so he could feel the lower part of the fence. The steel links went down into the ground. They'd have to search for a low spot. Then, maybe, if he could locate something to dig with. He raised up and quickly studied the area in front of him. Immediately ahead, and joined to the house by a covered walkway, was a long structure that blocked part of the lighted circle. It looked like an old coach house or a stable that had been turned into a garage. Surely he could find a shovel or something inside. "Stay here," he ordered, "and keep the vines over you. I'm going to get a shovel." Before she could protest, he darted forward to the nearest corner of the building and crept cautiously around the end of it away from the house. As he reached the far corner, he heard the helicopter closing in somewhere behind him. He hesitated, peering around the edge, and saw that the place was indeed a garage, and raced inside. His head still hurt, and it was hard to keep his thoughts straight. Yet he must concentrate on finding what he needed and getting out of here before the helicopter set down. The landing lights outside clearly showed him everything in the place: 3 cars and a familiar white van, and an untidy workbench in the rear. There was no sign of a shovel or any sort of garden tool. He sped towards the workbench and snatched up the first thing he saw that he might possibly dig with. It was a heavy hatchet. Whirling, he ran to the door with it, then stopped abruptly and backed away. The helicopter was coming down directly in front of him, and someone was approaching swiftly from the house. Another thing is there's a certain unrewarded stupidity in Jan's actions. He's not always entirely punished for things, but he is he feels very instinctive solutions to things. Not instinctive, simple solutions to things that he tries to react to without involving other people. But for now, that is the end of that chapter, and so let's take another break here.
between continents in the cathedrals of New York and Rome. There is a feeling that you should just go home and spend a lifetime finding out just where that is. In the shadows of tall buildings, the architecture is slowly peeling. Marble statues and glass dividers. Someone is watching all of the outsiders. The line moves slowly through the numbered gate, past the mosaic of the head of state in the cathedrals of New York and Rome. There is a feeling that you should just go home and spend a lifetime finding out just where that in the shadows of tall buildings, of open arches, endlessly kneeling, sonic landscapes, echoing vistas. Someone is listening from a safe distance. The line moves slowly into a fading light, a final moment in the dead of night. In the cathedrals of New York and Rome, there is a feeling that you should just go home and spend a lifetime finding out just where that is. In the cathedrals of New York and Rome, there is a feeling that you should just go home and spend a lifetime finding out just where that is. Finding out just where that is.
Chapter 11. Chess. He crouched behind the van and watched the stocky pilot swing down to the ground after the rotor stopped, and speak to someone who had come out to meet him. With a little cold ripple of shock, he realized the man from the house was Bolinsky, the muscle guard he had attacked with a lamp base. Bolinsky? What would that accent be? Probably Bolinsky. Just as suddenly he knew Bolinsky by sight and name. Just why he suddenly knew Bolinsky by sight and name was beyond him. Yet little fragments of memory were crowding upon him, insisting that his mind retrieve them. But he had no time now. He thrust them away and tried to think, for all at once had come to him that this was like the final part of the desperate game of chess. He and Ginny were bound to lose unless he thought of all the possible moves ahead and chose exactly the right ones. He watched Bolinsky and Clausen, the pilot, hurry towards the house, then ran to the door, only to stop in abrupt indecision. What was he planning to do? Find a low place and dig a hole under the fence with a hatchet? How long would that take? Even now, Big Doc must be climbing the stairs to administer the sedatives Helga had ordered him to give. Or he could be there this very moment, furiously trying to open one of the doors from which the keys had been taken. Unless duplicate keys were handy, the doors would be broken open. Immediately, the whole ground staff would be sent on a frantic search of the house and grounds. Could he and Ginny tunnel under a buried fence without being discovered by the searching staff? Jan wavered. The ringing was still in his head, and it was hard to keep his thoughts together. Then he looked at the helicopter, and it suddenly came to him there was only one good chess move he could make at the moment. The fence could wait. Abruptly, he dashed from the garage and raced as fast as he could across the lighted area to the open door of the machine. He had no memory of ever having been in a helicopter before, and he was surprised at the size of this one, but he wasted not an instant looking around. 3 quick steps took him to the pilot seat, where he began swinging the hatchet as fast and as hard as he could. In a matter of seconds, he had destroyed the compass and half the instrument panel, and everything that looked important, including the radio. Before he smashed it, he wondered if he should use it to try to call for help, but instantly discarded the idea because he was totally unfamiliar with the instrument, and its location was still a mystery. He was racing back to the garage when he heard the alarm go off in the house again. It was followed by the muffled but angry sound of a voice giving orders over the loudspeaker. For a second he thought he had been seen. Then it came to him that the locked doors had been opened and their escape discovered. Time had run out. Even so, he did not hesitate when he reached the first car, which happened to be the van. Destroying the rear tires of the car took longer than disabling the helicopter, though he managed it quickly enough when he learned the trick of slashing the sidewalls with the hatchet's sharp point. The final tire collapsed with a satisfying rush of air before he heard a door slam at the rear of the house. It was followed by voices and rapid footsteps on the gravel outside, but by now he was moving swiftly through the back of the garage, wondering how he could reach Ginny without being seen. The problem was solved for him when he rounded the corner of the van, for he came face to face with her. In a frightened whisper, she said accusingly, "What on earth are you doing?" Instead of answering, he put a hurried finger to his lips, cautiously opened the van's rear door, and then ordered her inside with a jerk of his head. He followed her in and very carefully pulled the door closed. When it clicked shut, he wasn't sure whether it automatically locked or not, but at least they were safe for the time being. He listened a moment, and when he could hear no one near, he said quietly, "I couldn't find anything but this hatchet to dig with, so I figured I'd better wreck the helicopter and do something to the cars. Now they're stuck here and they can't take us away." "Oh, of course," she whispered, picking up his thoughts. "Thank goodness you pulled it off. We couldn't have dug under the fence in time without being seen. They've got lights all around the grounds. I'm so thankful they haven't got a watchdog here, or we'd be sunk." Big Doc hates dogs," he told her. How do you know that?" "It just came back to me, like some other things. I'm still wondering how you got out of your room." "That was easy. They didn't take my glasses, and there was a piece of paper lining the drawer of my table. I stuck the paper under the door, punched the key out with the earpiece of my glasses, and pulled the key to me with the paper. I had a little trouble because of the carpet, but I fished the key under the door." She stopped and listened a moment, and then said uneasily, "What are we going to do now?" "Can you talk to Otis?" "Yes. I thought for sure he'd fall asleep before this, but he's still wide awake." "Has he told you about Nat Martin?" "Yes, and the transmitter. I told him they'd found it on you and smashed it." "How'd you know that?" "Big Doc came to my room and showed it to me, in the dark. He knows all about my eyes." In the vague light coming through the small opening in the partition behind her, he saw her clench her small fists and beat them on the padded floor. "That horrible man! He's been spying on us for months. He knows all about the Rhodes family. He said if I didn't behave and do as I was told, that things would go badly for me and worse for you. Oh, if I'd been able to do like Pops and point my finger." "I know how you feel. It got me the same way when he came to my room and told me how bad it would be for you if I didn't behave. I could have..." Jan shook his head and asked, "Does he know you can talk to Otis?" "I don't think so. I picked a lot of crazy things out of that snaky mind of his. Things I'm still trying to put together, but not that. Ask Otis if Nat Martin is still there." "He's there, and so's everybody else. When I got back there by the fence, I told Otis we managed to get out of the house, but the fence has us stumped. So they're all waiting to see how we make out. Mr. Martin wants us to tell him anything we've learned that might give him a clue to where we are. Traffic sounds, planes going over, something somebody may have said. Tell Otis to ask him if he's got another transmitter. If he has, I'm going back right away to get it." "Jan, do you think you can, after all that has happened to you?" "I've got to. Ask him." Tensely he waited while she clenched her hands and called silently to Otis again. Presently she raised her head. "Yes," she said, in a whisper so low he could hardly hear her. "They've got another transmitter. It's a bigger one with a much longer range." He was greatly relieved. "Okay, I'm on my way. I'll be back just as soon as I can." It was only now, when he had stretched out on the padded floor of the van and closed his eyes, that doubt rose like an impenetrable gray wall to block him. His head still hurt, and the curious ringing in his ears hadn't stopped. He'd always been strong, but after the drug and the shock and the crack on the head when he fell, he suddenly wondered if he had enough energy even for a one-way trip, not to speak of a return. It seemed impossible. But he'd done it before. He'd done it twice before in his memory, though never over such a distance. Still, distance shouldn't matter, not even physical strength. Wasn't it entirely of the mind? When he was very little, his father... He clenched his hands and closed his eyes tighter, trying not to think of his father. There wasn't time for that now. He had to get to the Rhodes Library, and the only way to do that was to concentrate on it until he could see it in every detail as if he were there, and want to be there so badly he could actually feel the blue Chinese rug under his hands. Gradually the library sharpened in his mind. The chairs, the piano, the long shelves of books took on the reality of 3 dimensions. The ringing in his head became a whirling. There was a curious sharp sound as of air being displaced, and suddenly the rough texture of the van's padding softened and became something else. He knew he was there even before he heard exclamations and gasps of relief from those who were waiting for him. Unsteadily he sat up on the blue rug and opened his eyes. The room seemed to tip and spin as he straightened, and he heard Nat Martin whisper hoarsely, "He actually did it." I told you he would, said Heron Rhodes. The doctor, gray and drawn, came over quickly and knelt beside him. Thank God, he breathed. Otis and Hecuba followed. Otis, hollow-eyed, asked squeakily, Is Jenny safe in that van? I think so. At least till daylight, Jan told him. That transmitter, where is it? I've got to get back. No, Hecuba said firmly. Not yet. What you've done's drained you. You're white as a sheet. You couldn't return now if you tried. Bill, bring him some of them cushions and prop him up so he can relax a while. And Jackson, a little coffee won't hurt him. Bring him a cup. Bill Zorn made him comfortable with cushions, and the stocky lawyer brought him coffee, which he sipped gratefully. Nat Martin slipped a hand-sized transmitter into his jacket pocket and carefully buttoned it. Just so it'll be there when you're ready to take off, Martin said. Now, if you can answer a couple of questions while you rest, we'll be that much further ahead. I've got men ready to move as soon as we've got some idea of direction. Ginny has described the building and the grounds, but that could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius, and that covers a lot of territory. Did you happen to notice the license plate of any of the cars? Jan shook his head. It's too dark in the back of the garage. Anyhow, I was moving too fast. Maybe Ginny. She didn't either. Otis has already asked her. I'd rather not have her leave the van to look. What about traffic? Did you hear any, or any unusual sounds? I did hear traffic, but it was a long way off. Nothing else. What direction was it? North of the house? South? I don't know. It was to the right when we faced the porch. You couldn't see any stars? No, sir. It was black dark. Huh? Had it rained? No, sir, but it sure sounded like it was going to. I could hear thunder off somewhere. Martin suddenly looked thoughtful. We had a thunderstorm here over an hour ago, but now the stars are out. Otis, ask your sister if it's raining there now. In the short interval of silence while Otis called to Ginny, the uncertainty Jan had felt about his ability to return now deepened and changed to dread. What if he couldn't make it back? What would happen to Ginny? The answer came swiftly, unbidden, before he could voice it. Otis burst into a reedy voice. Ginny says it's raining tadpoles there, and she can't open the van door. She just tried because she wanted to read the license plates, but she can't budge it. Must have locked itself when it was closed. Don't worry about her, Nat Martin told him. She ought to be safe till we get there. Abruptly he stood up and glanced at Bill Zorn. We better go, Bill. Bill Zorn looked startled. Go where? East, said Martin. That's where the weather front is moving. If it's raining where she is, that would place her roughly 30 miles to the east, maybe a bit north, give or take a few miles. If we leave now, we'll be that much closer when Jan gets back there with the transmitter. Time's important. They can't get away very fast, Bill said, rising swiftly. Not after Jan sabotaged all their transportation. Don't kid yourself. These people have means. The moment they discover what Jan did, they'll get their pilot out in a cab to get another chopper. If one isn't available right away, they'll hire cars to take Ginny with them. What worries me is that they must have a front they're operating behind. A front? Heron Rhodes said uneasily. How do you mean? Take the call Ginny told us about. It would seem to be a direct overseas call, but I doubt it. It's too risky. You'd need a front that naturally would be receiving calls from abroad. Jan, did that woman start talking immediately when she answered the phone without identifying herself? Yes, sir. She didn't say who she was. She started talking and asking questions. Real fast. In German, I think. Then it was a local call. Probably an extension, Martin said. In other words, there's another place nearby that that would often have overseas calls. A very respectable place. Does that ring any bells, Doctor? A respectable place? Why, the two most respectable and exclusive sanitariums in the country are in that general direction. There's Pine Ridge, which has no equal on earth, and there's Green Springs, with wealthy patients from everywhere. We can forget Pine Ridge, said Jackson Lane. You helped found it. But Green Springs is something else. You tell him about it, Bill. Well, Mr. Lane and I checked out all those institutions, Bill Zorn said. But this one gave us a turn. Green Springs is supposedly run by an American corporation. Most of the stock is owned by a highly suspect German group, and they give the orders from an office in Switzerland. On top of it, they have strong political connections in Washington. Heron whispered softly, God's preserve us. Even Nat Martin looked shocked. That's not good. In fact, it frightens me. With such a setup, Green Springs could swallow Ginny and that whole bunch and have them out of the country before we could get a permission to do a thing. We've got to get there before they find Ginny. Martin caught up his bag and jerked his head at Bill Zorn. Let's get going, Bill. Jan struggled upright and watched them hurry away. I better get going too, he said. They'll need that transmitter signal to find the house. It may not be anywhere near the Green Springs grounds. Stay where you are, Hecuba ordered. There's time enough. You're not ready to leave yet, and something tells me you shouldn't. And on to chapter 12. Okay, it looks like this will be the last chapter for the day here, but decent amount of pacing here. Chapter 12. Matilda. Jan, leaning back against the cushions with his eyes closed, trying to relax, had almost succeeded when the tall clock beyond the piano began to strike. He jerked upright, hands clenched nervously as he counted the deep notes. 4 o'clock. He glanced at Hecuba. It'll soon be daylight. Hadn't I better? Not yet, she told him. I don't know why I'm making you wait, but something says you must. Anyway, Bill and Mr. Martin will still have a long way to go. She looked at Otis, seemingly asleep in the big chair where he had spent most of the night, hesitated and said quietly, Wake up, Otis. I know you must be tired, but... The small boy opened his owlish eyes, now ringed with dark circles. I ain't asleep, he muttered. I'm just talking to Ginny to keep her company. It's awfully hard being where she is, all alone. She says the rain's almost stopped, and she can hear somebody hollering, sort of like he's mad. She thinks they found out about the helicopter. It suddenly occurred to Jan that his work with the hatchet would be taken as proof that he and Ginny hadn't gotten away, but were still hiding somewhere, either in the house or on the grounds. That meant the search for them would go on more furiously than ever, and that soon someone was bound to open the van door. All at once the old doubts poured over him in a wave of torment. What if he couldn't make it back to Ginny? Why, he might never see her again. Not ever. They'd get another helicopter and take her away, and by the time Matilda would be through with her... No, he protested aloud. I've got to get back. What's the matter, son? Heron said in quick concern. I was just thinking ahead about Matilda. Matilda? Heron raised his eyebrows. Where does she come in? She's Big Doc's machine. She's the one he's been putting me in to blank out my memory. Ginny didn't say anything about her? No. Good Lord. A machine, a devilish mind blaster. Heard rumors of the thing. Seems that Viennese specialist whose name I can't recall. Was it Leopold something or other? Leopold. By jingo, it was Leopold. Big, bald, pointed beard, soft voice. Leopold Zworkin, that's the rascal. That's Big Doc. If only I'd remembered it earlier, Heron growled. Could have had him traced and located. Helps to know he's Zworkin. It's like being able to name a disease. Name it, no matter how bad it is, you feel you can deal with it. Power of naming things. Power of names. Well, he knows all about everyone here, especially Ginny. Did she tell you? He's been having her watched for a long time. He and that woman, he called her Helga, planned to kidnap her later and send her straight to Kiev. Then I ran away. Heron Rhodes looked at him grimly. Kidnap her later? Take her to Kiev? Grief and Moses, you were right, son. That rascal of a Zorkin knew all along she could see in the dark. He stood up, snapping his long fingers. His mouth began to twist in a rising fury. Why, that rotten, cripple-headed creep! It suddenly exploded. If I ever get my hands on him... Don't touch him, Jackson Lane ground out softly, deadly serious. Just point your finger at him, the way you used to do all those blackbirds, and I hope I'm there to see it. I would like to see it myself, Hecuba said vindictively. What I cannot understand is how that Zworkin creature found out about us in the first place. We've been so careful to keep our peculiarities a secret. It has to be the book, Heron told her. But there was no clue to our identity. It was just the history of a family, and went back hundreds of years. How? Heron said, if some interested government wanted to locate the living descendants of that family, they could do without too much trouble. What book is this? Jackson Lane asked curiously. It's called the Aragon Strain, Hecuba replied. There's a copy of it over on the shelf behind you. It's a history of our maternal ancestors and their peculiarities. The family originated in Aragon, so the researchers used that name to protect the members of it, and to identify them as a group. There's not too many left. The last Aragon male, a direct descendant, died only a short time ago. Well, I'd never dreamed of such a thing, the lawyer rumbled, shaking his head. Say, do you suppose Jan has some of that Aragon blood in him? It's entirely possible, Heron admitted. If we had his last name, and Sergeant Bricker said he'd hope to have some word on that in the morning, it wouldn't be hard to trace. However, you mustn't forget that abilities like Jan's can crop up in any family. In fact, they're always cropping up. In this curious age of non-belief, people are... In fact, they're always cropping up, but in this curious age of non-belief, people are afraid to admit. Heron stopped abruptly as a strangled sound came from Otis. What's the matter, son? They found her, small boy cried tearfully. They just opened the van door. It's all right, Hecuba spoke quickly, almost with relief. Now Jan can return with the transmitter and not be caught with it. Jan, she went on, turning to him, is there any place in that room where you can hide the thing? You'll have to go back to the room, because they'll surely be watching for you at the van. They're bound to guess you went for another transmitter. He nodded and said, There's a good place in the lavatory. I'll put it there the first thing. He thrust the cushions aside, laid flat on the rug, and closed his eyes. This time he had no doubt whatever about his ability to return. He had to do it, no matter what. For the only important thing in the world right now was Ginny. The moment he closed his eyes, the bare little windowless prison of a room came sharply to his mind, and he willed himself there with all the power he could summon. And almost instantly, it seemed, the soft wool rug beneath him changed and became the rumpled sheet upon a cot. Jan opened his eyes and tried to sit up, but was only barely able to do so. He fell back, surprised at his weakness, and suddenly alarmed because of it. The door to the hall was open, and he could hear voices somewhere below. What if someone came before he could hide the transmitter? He fumbled with the button on his jacket pocket, drew out the transmitter, and managed to slide it under the mattress beneath him. Then slowly he thrust himself back up on an elbow and swung his feet off the cot. Strength was flowing back into him now, though he felt a little lightheaded from the lack of food and sleep. He took a deep breath and stood up, went to the door and removed the skeleton key that someone had used to open it, and closed it and locked it on the inside. The light was still on in the lavatory. Hurrying in, he found the wrecked transmitter in the other pocket of his jacket, and with the thin broken edge of it, he was able to pry open the hinged plywood panel in the rear wall. Behind the panel, he expected to find a recess of some kind, hopefully one large enough to crawl into an emergency. Certainly there would be a place to conceal the new transmitter. But there wasn't. The place was an open shaft full of pipes, and there was not a spot where anything the size of his hand could be safely wedged so it wouldn't fall through the walls. Should he take the chance and leave the transmitter under the mattress? If it remained there only 20 minutes, that should be long enough for Nat Martin's direction finder to track it down. Something told him this was a poor chess move, for the mattress was the first place where a searcher would look. Anything could happen, and Nat Martin might need far more than 20 minutes to pinpoint the mansion, especially if it was out in the country, hidden on a big estate. The smart thing would be to hide the transmitter in another room, or a closet no one would think of looking at first. He took it from under the mattress, went quickly to the door, and tried to peer through the small circle of glass in the hall. Seeing nothing, he realized the glass was the one-way kind. A person could look in but not look out. Listening a moment, he very carefully unlocked the door and eased it open a few inches. The hall was empty, and gray daylight and a vague streak of dawn pink were showing through the window at the end of it. The window gave him an idea. If he could raise it a little, why not slide the transmitter out on a ledge beyond it? Sorry, 1 second here. Swiftly he started down the hall. Before he could reach the window, he heard voices below and hasty footsteps on the stairs. He raced back to his room and barely managed to close and lock the door before the footsteps reached the landing. He was trying desperately to think of what to do when a heavy hand shook the knob. "It's locked," someone muttered. "Didn't you say you left it open, George?" Yeah, George growled. It sounded like the same heavy-footed George who helped capture him days ago. Open, the key in the lock. Kid must be in there. Then get another key and open it, ordered the first man. Wasn't it Bolinsky, the guard with the muscles? No dice, George told him. He's the last skeleton key in the house. We better bust in before that kooky kid does another vanishing act. Give it a kick. As a heavy bolt struck the lock, Jan spun into the lavatory and closed the door. He fumbled under the knob, found a thumb latch, and shot the bolt home. Now, until they hauled him out of here, there was only one more chess move he could make. He watched the door, and as a powerful kick knocked it back on its hinges, he lifted the panel in the back wall and held up the transmitter. Is this what you want? He asked. Hand it over, Bolinsky ordered in a voice that meant business, and reached for it. Jan tossed it down the pipe shaft. Go and get it, he taunted. Bolinsky cursed and grabbed him by the arm. Twist your smarty head off if Big Doc wasn't getting ready to fry it, Matilda. You got him mad, boy. He's really going to cook you this time. The guard jerked his long chin at George and snapped, Get down in the basement and open that door to the shaft. Better find that thing he dropped and find it fast, or we could all be in the soup. Jan set his jaw as fear knifed through him. Why put me in Matilda now? He stammered. It's hardly daylight. Don't you people ever sleep? Big Doc works at night, Bolinsky growled, putting him in almost furiously into the hall after the hurrying George. Or don't you remember? No, you wouldn't, but I'm tell you this, you and me, we got a score to settle, and I'm not forgetting it. If you've got any sense, Jan flared back, you'll get away from here fast while you have the chance. Don't you realize the law will be here soon? Phooey, we'll be long gone before the law ever finds this place. Now shut up, or I'll give you a treatment of my own before I tuck you into Matilda. He did not see Matilda at once when Bolinsky hauled him into the big room with its clutter of equipment in the rear of the house. All he saw was a bedraggled Ginny sitting in a chair, her hands tied to the wooden arms, her small mouth tight and defiant. A single tear had run down from under her dark glasses and was now drying on her cheek. Near her stood Big Doc, cold little eyes almost hidden in their plump rolls of flesh, talking to a grim-faced Helga. Ginny said words to him merely by opening her mouth and closing it. Big Doc turned from Helga and confronted him, slowly flexing his plump hands as if he wanted to strangle someone. Then, speaking as softly as Jan ever heard him, Big Doc said, So you were in your room. I thought they'd find you there. And did you bring back another little tattletale? He brought one, said Bolinsky. Before I could grab it, he tossed it down the shaft in his John. George has gone to the basement to get it. Pray he gets it quickly, Big Doc's voice added, even softer. And if it is where he cannot get it, then pray it is not still running after falling so far. The cold little eyes bored into Jan. You have been very bad. You have been bad. Very bad. You have caused us great trouble. For that you must be punished. I will not tolerate. Leopold, the stern Helga interrupted. What are you up to? The boy is too smart for his own good, much too troublesome. It is time I took some of that out of him. No, you are not to do anything that will hurt his abilities. Besides, there isn't time. Will not hurt his ability, but the rest of his mentality must be reduced. A good servant is a moron who does exactly as he is told. I intend to make a good servant out of him. As for time... Leopold, if that transmitter he threw down the shaft is still working, and George cannot get to it, we haven't a minute to waste here. Harry's trying to get at least one car in shape by trying the spares from the others. But if they don't fit, we'd better start walking. Sorry, that flew apart. Why don't you call Jenna to send us another car? At this hour? Where could she get one? Her station wagon. Her station wagon is here in our garage with 2 flats, and I'll not ask her to call a cab. Cabs are out, even if she could find one now. She swung suddenly to Belinsky. This is such a child's idea of transportation. Like, the nice car is broken? What about the station wagon? She swung suddenly to Belinsky. When you found him, how long had the boy been back from his trip? Any idea? 5 minutes at the most. George had just checked his room when the doctor decided we'd better go back there and wait. I see. Even 2 minutes is 2 minutes too long. It would give them direction. Then all they'd have to do would be to fly over the area until they spotted a large helicopter behind an old house. Big Doc sniffed. Oh, nonsense, Helga. It would take hours before the authorities around here could get together and start an air search. Clausen tells me he'll have the helicopter out of here and back in the hangar in a little while. I thought it could not fly. He's fixing it so it can. He hasn't any instruments, but at least he can get it back to the hangar and out of sight. Now, what I want to know is what arrangements are being made. The big flabby man paused, eyes sharpening on the doorway. Well, George? I got it, George announced, entering and holding out the transmitter in his broad palm. Found it at the bottom of the shaft, and it was dead, cracked on the concrete. Gave it another crack to make sure. Jan's hopes drained away, and a terrible coldness began to harden in his middle. He began looking covertly, desperately, around the room, searching for some object he could use as a weapon. The most difficult thing would be to break away from Belinsky. The man had a steely grip on his arm. Then, just to the right of Ginny, he noticed the old-fashioned fireplace. A cold grate it was, with a poker, tongs, and shovel and a holder on one side. The poker wasn't large, but it would do if he could get to it. If he could think of some trick to break away from Belinsky. He heard George say something about going to help Harry, and add over his shoulder as he went out that 2 cars would soon be ready to roll. 2 cars? Helga questioned, to which Belinsky answered, That's right, all the wheels happen to be the same size. And the guard said to the doctor, Are you ready for your patient, sir? I'm ready, the big man replied very softly, and added it in a whisper. Put him in Matilda. Just a moment, Helga ordered. Remember, Leopold, we haven't much time. A half hour at the most. 15 minutes is all I need, my dear. I intend to compress 10 treatments into one. It will seem like many days to our rebellious young man, but when it is over he will no longer be rebellious. He will ride like a lamb to Kiev instead of fighting us all the way. The big man turned, stepped to a curtain stretched over a frame, and slung it aside. At the sight of the black coffin-like box upended at an angle in the midst of an incomprehensible puzzle of dials, tubes, and gauges. Jan forgot everything but his horror of the object in front of him. His staring eyes riveted upon the padded interior, the straps whose function was to hold him powerless inside, the gleaming steel bands that would be clamped about his forehead and wrists and would carry the knifing power to attack the inner fibers of his mind and being. Until this moment he had been unable to recall little more than his terrible fear of Matilda. She did her work well. But now with the sudden sight of her he knew again the writhing blackness she could send shrieking through his brain, the inescapable icy burning blackness that could go twisting through every mental channel forever and ever and forever. "No!" he cried. "No! No! No! Strap him in," Big Doc commanded. Jan heard Jenny scream out in protest. The scream seemed to release a new force inside of him, for abruptly his fear converted to fury. In spite of what he had been through, there arose in him reserves of strength he had not known he possessed. He lashed out, fighting with everything he had, kicking, biting, using fist and knee and elbow with even greater effect than he had used them days ago in the road's hallway. Volinsky clung to him, but panted hoarsely. "For God's sakes, give him a hypo. The kid's gone wild." It was Helga who came quickly with the hypodermic. He saw her approaching while Bolinsky struggled to hold him still. Suddenly remembering what he could do, he concentrated instantly on the needle. He must have been generating far more force than he realized, for it stopped Helga in her tracks, and the needle exploded. In the second of shock that followed, Volinsky gasped and released his grip, and Jan squirmed eel-like away and leaped for the fireplace. When he whirled back to face the hated three opposing him, he had the poker in one hand and the tongs in the other. Big Doc, showing fear for the first time, scrambled out of the way, but not fast enough to escape a vicious swing that laid open his cheek and brought a spurt of blood. Volinsky dove for him and succeeded only in getting himself knocked cold with the tongs. Now Matilda was at his mercy. Jan attacked her savagely. In seconds he had smashed every important tube and gauge, yet he continued his mad swings with the poker and tongs, even after he had totally wrecked the hated thing that had destroyed so much of himself and was slated to destroy Ginny too. He saw Helga approaching him warily out of the corner of his eye and spun about in time to face her. But he knew nothing of judo and was totally unprepared when her foot shot forth and knocked the poker from his hand. He tried to swing the tongs, but suddenly she had his free hand, and he was flung to the floor with such force that the breath was knocked out of him. A moment later she was upon him, her strong thumb pressing with instant precision against the nerves in his neck. Everything faded and fell into blackness. And we will leave it there for now. I will tell you that chapter 13, the next one, is titled Escape. And a little bit bothered by the extreme personification of Matilda at the point of destruction. That felt really weird. Along with some of the... And there's been an occasional word choice here and there that were of their times. But yeah, there's definitely some stereotypes in the characterization of symbols of evil and such like that. I'd almost prefer, like, well, it is what it is. So like I said, we're going to go ahead and continue this another time. And thanks everyone for stopping by or watching later, or however you enjoy this. At least I hope you're enjoying this. Do let me know what you think. Thanks.